Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. This week we have huge news in regards to the interest rates, which affects the economy quite a bit. We have a solar storm that caused blackouts in Australia and Asia. And this actually has happened before with a storm that took out the entire electrical system in the world. I'll let you guys know about that as well. And a little bit of news about not so global warming. Let's go ahead and get started. On Monday, the chairman of the central bank in the United States, Powell, said that they are going to rush to raise the rates this year. So the original expectation was that they're going to start reducing rates, right now in February, March or so. And so if you guys can hear that dog, I got my big Tibetan Mastiffs here with me, and they're here with daddy on the weekend, and they're a little bit crazy. But so he said that they were going to drop the rates as fast as they expected to, and that they're going to move at a slower pace than what the market expected. And so this basically caused a little bit of a ruckus in the market because obviously the situation with the interest rates is extremely important because we live in an over-financialized economy. In 2008 and 2009, well, it started a little bit before that. Let me go and back up so you guys can hear the full story. 1999, there was a hedge fund that collapsed. If I remember correctly, the name of the hedge fund, it was Long-Term Capital Management. Instead of allowing it to fail and, let the toxic assets out of the system, what they did was they spread the assets throughout the financial system. They sold it to hedge funds in Europe and the United States and everything. And so the toxic assets basically just continued to grow. So we had that huge hedge fund fail in 1998, 99. That was during the dot-com bubble. Then we had the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. That wasn't the only reason that the financial crisis happened. Part of the problem was that Clinton removed what's called the Glass-Steagall Act, which was basically instituted after the Great Depression in 1929, and it created a barrier between a bank and not a hedge fund, but a broker. So a bank couldn't use your savings, for example, and go invest it in risky things in the stock market. Because due to the fact that the stock market has non-certain returns, meaning that sometimes you might win, sometimes you might lose, it's considered as risky. What isn't considered risky are things like treasury bonds, not like the government of the United States is going bankrupt or anything, but, that's a fixed interest rate. So you're automatically going to get that interest rate no matter what, and that's what's considered quote-unquote safe. So Clinton removed that, and then the bank started, playing with your money, using your savings to buy toxic assets, essentially. Then now, obviously, we're walking into a much bigger crisis due to the fact of the debt that we're racking up. But the idea here is that after 2008 and 2009, the entire world essentially dropped interest rates to the lowest in recorded history. So not, it's 100 years. We're talking about Roman times, recorded history. So that caused a massive bubble of all bubbles, and the market just started moving because now instead of being able to afford just one house, now with interest rates at practically zero, you can go out and buy 5 or 6 houses. See how it works? And so since consumers, especially in the United States, is almost 70% of the economy, when the interest rates are low and the consumer is out there spending money, buying $100,000 cars and phones and everything, your interest rates on your credit cards are much lower, you can afford everything. So now that the interest rates are much higher, things get a lot more expensive. Add on to that the problem that we had with the inflation after the pandemic, because I think you guys know more than I do going to the grocery store that the inflation isn't really 3 or 5%, right? I think your grocery bill's probably gone up by, 100%, 200%. Let me know there in the comments. That's why interest rates are so important, because we live in a over-financialized economy. And that's why if they just move them a little bit, that just, spreads throughout the entire economy. And since the United States is still the biggest economy in the world, let's go America, that affects the entire world essentially, right? NVIDIA, the stock, is now worth more than the entire Chinese stock market as well, according to a study that was done. They've actually been on a tear. If you don't know, NVIDIA is the one that's making a lot of these advanced chips for artificial intelligence. And one of the things that I read was that they are using artificial intelligence. They're using AI to actually design the AI chips that the AI is going to use, which I thought was pretty funny. So thanks to that news about the interest rates, the markets in the United States and Canada just soared to the upside. The S&P 500 hit its 9th record close, hit 5,000 for the first time ever. And moving on to a little bit more sour news, there was a huge explosion on the sun that caused blackouts near Australia and Asia. The NOAA, which is another U.S. department, shows a 45% chance of radio disruption in the coming days. And if you don't know, in 1859, there was something called the Carrington event, and this was actually a solar storm that hit Earth. And at that point, the electrical system was called the telegraph system. If you don't know, that literally knocked out the entire telegraph system. So imagine that happening again today, where there's a solar storm, it hits Earth, and it literally knocks out the entire electrical system in the world. Most of the electrical companies around the world haven't refortified their systems to be able to try to protect from that. And another thing that you should probably know is that the only places where they make these huge transformers for, the big electrical systems that cities and states need is in Germany and South Korea. So if this happens, you're probably going to be out of electricity for a while, because it's probably not going to even get to Canada or America for a while until they resolve things like Asia and Europe first. And in the global warming news category, I think I was going to call it global weather to not get those warnings on YouTube. A thin layer of ice formed over the Adriatic Sea. The Adriatic Sea is the one to the right of Italy, to the left of places like Montenegro and Croatia. And this is the first time that it was observed at least a quarter of a century ago. So they're talking about the Earth is warming in record and blah, 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 blah since recorded history. Because remember, they're only taking temperatures for 100 years or so. But there's ice forming in some of the same places where they're saying that there's record cold or record warm. Just throwing that out there. Overseas market news, the European markets are mostly mixed. Istanbul was the biggest winner there. Latin America, those markets were mixed as well. The Merval in Argentina went down by over 16%. Africa and the Middle East was mixed. Saudi Arabia went up by more than the others at 2.42%. And then the far East, Asia, Australia, that area, we had the Shanghai market in China going up almost 5%, even though those markets were mixed as well. Bitcoin and crypto, not a whole lot of crypto news for the most part. Bitcoin finally got a little bit of movement. It went up this week 9.62% to $47,216 as of Saturday morning. It's probably changed a little bit since you guys watched this video. And in commodities, cacao prices reached a record high. This is thanks due to the drought in most of the Western African nations, the 3 African nations that produce the majority of the cacao. If you guys don't know, cacao is a plant that gives you the fruit that allows you to make chocolate and other sweets. So most likely going to see an increase in price in a lot of those chocolates now due to the fact that the prices of cacao have gone up to record highs. Israel has rejected a ceasefire in Gaza that's causing oil to go up. If you guys remember, the Houthis, which are the terrorist group in Yemen, which are shooting the tankers with oil, and all the other tankers said that they're not going to stop until they stop in Gaza. That's part of the reason why oil went up quite a bit. Oil went up in the U.S. 6.30% to $76.84, while Brent went up over 6% to $82.19. One of the things I found really unusual, I don't want to kind of get into the politics of, who's doing what and why, but the war for anybody is horrible. But what I do find a little bit interesting is why everybody in the world, in the Middle East, is so mad at the people in Israel and what they're doing to the people in Gaza, while there's Muslims in China that are in concentration camps, but nobody says anything about that. Isn't that interesting? Gold went down 0.75% to $2,025.40. Silver as well went down 0.26%, $22.69. I like to do these videos because I always try to explain why it works. If the central bank, the chairman Powell, said that they're not going to they're not going to lower rates as fast as everybody thought, that means that they're going to stay the same, which causes a demand for the dollar, which means that the value of the dollar goes up, which means that all of the raw materials that are listed in dollars goes down in value because they have an inverse relationship. That's why, for example, gold and silver went down. Financial and banking news, Delinquencies on credit cards surged in 2023. The New York Fed, which is an office of the central bank in the United States, said that it's an indication of financial stress. Remember that almost 70% of the economy in the United States is consumer spending. So if the consumer is having financial stress, that means that the economy is most likely going to have financial stress. The delinquencies went up by 50% in 2023, and the debt swelled to a record $17.5 trillion. And the central bank in China also unleashed liquidity into the market since the economy in China is not doing very well. They unleashed $17.5 trillion into the Chinese economy. The banks are actually chasing factories to try to get them on these cheap loans, but they've been squeezed out by bigger rivals. And one of the things that's interesting as well is that the consumer prices in China fell to the pace at which it dropped fell by more than 14 years in January. So the rate at which it went down is the most that it went down from 14 years. And if you think about what 14 years was, I believe that was 2009 crisis. Let me do the math here. Yeah, 2009 crisis. They're revving up pressure also as policymakers are doing more to try to revive the economy on the low confidence. Their production prices are going down as well. And if you guys don't know how economies work, governments don't want prices to go down. They want them to go up because they can charge more taxes. Political news, Bukele, which is the president of El Salvador, won in a landslide. Democrats have opened a federal investigation into RFK because you got to play by the rules unless, they're doing the same thing to Trump as well. And the Biden administration classifies Martha's Vineyard and other elite enclaves as, quote, low income to get the EV charger subsidies. So money for thee, but not for me. Or that's backwards. Money for me, but not for thee. And 44% of all single-family home purchases in 2023 were by private equity firms. If you guys don't know what those communists at the World Economic Forum said, that basically you're not going to own anything and be happy by 2030. So they can fly on private jets that in 1 year produces more carbon than you will in your entire lifetime. They can do that, but you got 8 bugs and you can't have a car, and you're not going to be able to afford a house anymore. See how it works? And another big piece of news in the political space is Biden was stated to have, he was found to be guilty in the classified documents case where he brought some documents outside of the White House, so he's guilty. He should be, taken to prison. But they said that he's too old and he may have forgotten what he did. So outside of kind of I don't want to get political when I say this, but the kind of two-faced political system, the justice system that we have, because notice Trump was treated very differently than Biden, but he's too forgetful to be guilty of a crime, but he's not that forgetful to be president, and he's not that forgetful to run for re-election. Do I have that right? You guys see how that works, right? So he doesn't have good enough memory to be guilty of a crime, but he has good enough memory to have the nuclear codes. I'm just saying. We're not going to pick sides, but you know what I mean? Maybe we should have a guy that has a brain in there. You know what I mean? Maybe that's why we're almost at World War III with Russia. Corporate news. Microsoft is announcing plans to disable computers from people that share non-mainstream content online. It's an attempt to combat so-called misinformation on the run-up to 2024 election cycle. New York Community Bank, which is a regional bank, obviously in New York. This is the company that actually bought Signature Bank, which was one of the banks that failed last year. They revealed that they were talking to the regulators and they collapsed another 25%. If you guys remember last week, they went down by a bajillion percent as well. So it looks like we have another regional banking crisis on our hands. And Nvidia's shares hit a record high at almost $700 after Goldman Sachs said that the new target for the stock is going to be $800 after listing it at $625. Their stock is up over 50% in the last 3 months. McDonald's went down on not reaching their revenue that the analysts wanted. The fast food chain is saying that their conflict in Middle East is affecting their sales, so they blended on that essentially. And Chipotle, one of the best dining establishments in the United States, they went up over 7% on stronger than adjusted earnings. Their Q4 net income went up by over $60 million. The net sales went up over 15%. and the restaurant traffic grew over 7%. And Disney went up by over 11% after they posted higher than better results. Bad grammar there in the video, but you guys understand what I'm saying? I always get confused because I was thinking Spanish because I do the Spanish videos first. They're going to increase their dividend by 50%, and they're also going to get into gaming. They invested $1.5 billion in Epic Games, which is the maker of the very popular game called Fortnite. And they're going to try to develop games with their intellectual property, Marvel, Star Wars, Pixar, all of that. They're going to also launch an ESPN streaming service in 2025. Not a lot of trade news and technology news. And in investment news, Canada announced a 2-year extension on the ban on foreigners owning Canadian housing, set to expire January 1st, 2025, but they're going to extend it because for locals, it's becoming extremely difficult to purchase housing. Maybe they should not allow, the hedge funds to buy houses, maybe. 44% of all the houses in the United States, for example, were purchased by private equity funds. Single-family houses last year. You're going to own nothing and be happy. And ETFs tied to India, Japan, and Israel so far this year have been the best performing ETFs year to date. And international events, there's a huge fire going on right now in Chile. Looks very similar to those fires in Maui where everything was incinerated except the trees, which is really unusual. Rainfall in the atmospheric river in Southern California is putting 38 million people at risk due to the, I'm just going to say something here. All of this is going to happen. It's going to be a deluge, and then it's going to go into another dry season. They're going to have another drought. And all of this water that's coming, nobody's capturing that water. They're just letting it go to the ocean. This is maybe the reason why there's so many people leaving California, because there's just no common sense at all. King Charles III, which just received the kingdom, he just became quote-unquote king, now has cancer. He's 75 years old. And Spanish farmers had joined the farmers of Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and other countries to try to stop this ridiculous rules that these communists are trying to pass. And interesting facts for the week's mutant wolves that are roaming Chernobyl, which if you guys don't know, there was their nuclear explosion, not an explosion, let's call it a nuclear plant that melted down. Chernobyl, if I'm not mistaken, is in Ukraine. The wolves there developed cancer-resilient genomes, which they're saying that they may be able to use when it comes to buying cancer or helping people cure cancer. And one of the things, if you didn't know about cancer, there was a scientist that received the Nobel Prize for noticing that cancer actually ate sugar, processed sugar, not fruit sugar, but, candy sugar and the sugar that you put in your coffee. So I find it really unusual that if the scientific literature states they know that cancer eats sugar, why, when you go to get chemotherapy, do they give you a candy after you walk out of the office? That's the news for this week, guys. And remember, the preppers were right. See you next week.